I'm Serafina Blackwood, 28 years old, and I just watched my sister's perfect wedding crumble in real time. 3 hours ago, Madison called me, just staff, in front of 200 guests at what she thought was a luxury hotel she'd booked for free through connections. She had no idea she was humiliating the actual owner, me. What started as family betrayal ended with her groom walking out, her trust fund frozen, and security escorting her from MY property. But let me tell you how we got here, because this revenge was 15 years in the making. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers worldwide. If you're ready for a story about family betrayal, sweet revenge, and karma coming full circle, smash that like button and hit subscribe because you won't believe where this goes. Trust me, this wedding disaster is just the beginning. The story begins 3 months ago when I received an unexpected call that changed everything. I was in my downtown Seattle office, reviewing quarterly reports for my hospitality empire, 5 boutique hotels across the Pacific Northwest that I'd built from nothing. My assistant buzzed in with a call from someone claiming to be my sister, Madison, and I hadn't spoken in over a decade. After our parents died when I was 16 and she was 20, she'd inherited everything through a trust fund that wouldn't unlock until she turned 25. I got nothing, not even a place to live. Madison made it clear I was an unwanted burden, shipping me off to live with our elderly aunt in a tiny apartment while she enjoyed our family's wealth. Serafina. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, the same tone she'd used when she wanted something as kids. I know it's been forever, but I have incredible news. I'm getting married. I nearly hung up, but curiosity won. Congratulations, I said flatly. The thing is, she continued, I'm planning this amazing wedding, and I remembered you work in hotels now. Some little place, right? Anyway, I was hoping you could help me get a discount somewhere nice. Not too expensive though, even with my trust fund, weddings cost so much. My blood ran cold. Madison had no idea what I'd become. While she'd been living off our parents' money and bouncing between meaningless jobs, I'd clawed my way up from cleaning hotel rooms to owning my own properties. The little place she mentioned was actually the Blackwood Collection, worth over $50 million. What kind of venue are you looking for? I asked carefully. Oh, something elegant but not too fancy. Maybe 150 guests? I found this gorgeous place called the Meridian Rose. It's perfect, but they want $30,000 for the package I want. Can you believe that? For one day, my heart stopped. The Meridian Rose was my flagship property, the crown jewel of my collection. It was booked solid for 2 years in advance, with a waiting list of celebrities and politicians. The presidential suite alone cost more per night than most people's annual salaries. I could make some calls, I said, my mind racing. When's your wedding date? June 15th. I know it's short notice, but Kyle, that's my fiancé. His family is flying in from Europe. Oh, Sarah, you'd love him. He's everything I dreamed of: successful, handsome, from an amazing family. His father owns tech companies. June 15th. I pulled up my calendar. We had a cancellation that exact weekend. A tech mogul's daughter had postponed her event due to a family emergency. The date was worth $45,000, plus catering and extras. Let me see what I can do, I said. Send me the details. What happened next revealed the true depth of Madison's character. Instead of simply asking for help, she began spinning an elaborate web of lies. She called the Meridian Rose directly, claiming to be my business partner. She told them I'd authorized a comp for her wedding, the full luxury package, worth over $60,000. When my general manager, David, called to confirm this authorization, I nearly exploded. But then a deliciously dark idea began forming. Madison wanted to use me? Fine. But she was about to learn that actions have consequences. I authorized the booking. Over the next month, I watched through security cameras and staff reports as Madison toured MY Hotel, treating my employees like servants while bragging to her friends about her connections in the industry. She didn't recognize a single person who'd been there when our parents frequented the hotel for business dinners. She had no idea our family name was literally on the building's deed. But the worst came during her tasting appointment. Madison brought her bridal party, 6 women who clearly shared her entitled attitude. My executive chef, Maria, who'd known our family for years, nearly gave away my identity when she saw Madison. "Oh my God, you look just like," Maria started. "Like someone important, I'm sure," Madison interrupted with a laugh. "Everyone says I have that sophisticated look. It's probably why I'm getting married at such an exclusive place. My sister has amazing connections in the hotel world." Maria caught my eye across the kitchen where I was observing. I shook my head slightly. "Not yet." The tasting devolved into Madison criticizing every dish, demanding changes to accommodate her increasingly ridiculous requests, and treating the staff like they were invisible. When one of her bridesmaids knocked over a glass of wine, Madison snapped at our server to clean that up faster and muttered about the quality of help these days. But the final straw came when she pulled David aside and said, "I hope you understand that my sister's generosity has limits. She's being incredibly kind giving us this venue for free, but don't expect her to cover any extras. She works for you people. She's not exactly wealthy." You people. As if my staff, my chosen family, were beneath her. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Madison wanted a wedding at the Meridian Rose? She'd get one. But it would be on my terms, with my rules, and when the bill came due, she'd learn exactly who she'd been dealing with. I began planning my countermove, reaching out to contacts I'd made over the years. Madison's fiancé Kyle's family wasn't as impressive as she claimed. His father owned a small software company that was actually struggling financially. Kyle himself had been fired from his last 2 jobs for incompetence and had significant gambling debts. More importantly, I discovered something that would prove crucial. Madison's trust fund had specific clauses about moral character and family responsibility that could trigger a review of her access to the money. Our parents had been very specific about these conditions, worried about Madison's spoiled tendencies even then. The pieces were falling into place. Madison thought she was getting married at an exclusive hotel through her sister's minor connections in the industry. She had no idea she was about to face the consequences of 15 years of cruelty, wrapped in silk and served with champagne. The transformation in my approach began the moment I stopped seeing Madison as my sister and started viewing her as what she truly was, a problem requiring an elegant solution. The emotional hurt of her abandonment crystallized into something far more powerful, calculated determination. I spent the next 6 weeks methodically gathering intelligence while maintaining my facade as the helpful sister with modest hotel connections. Every conversation we had revealed more of her character, and frankly, it was worse than I'd remembered. Madison called me weekly with updates, each conversation a masterclass in narcissism. She complained about Kyle's mother being too involved in wedding planning, criticized his sister for being frumpy, and made snide comments about how some people don't understand elegant events. The irony of someone who'd inherited wealth rather than earned it lecturing others about class wasn't lost on me. "I'm so glad you're finally doing something meaningful with your life," she said during one particularly galling call. "Working in hospitality suits you. You were always good at serving others. Remember how you used to bring me breakfast in bed when we were kids?" I remembered. I'd been 10, she'd been 14, and she'd threatened to tell our parents I'd broken her jewelry box if I didn't bring her meals to her room. Even then, she'd been building a power dynamic where I existed to serve her needs. But Madison's cruelty wasn't just directed at me. Through my staff's reports, I learned how she treated everyone around her. She screamed at vendors over minor issues, reduced her wedding planner to tears twice, and actually made one of her bridesmaids pay for her own dress alterations after Madison demanded last-minute changes to the style. The breaking point came when I discovered what she'd told Kyle about me. My private investigator, yes, I'd hired one to dig deeper into Kyle's background. uncovered recorded conversations between Madison and Kyle where she described me as a family embarrassment who never amounted to anything after our parents died. She told him I was probably jealous of her success and that letting me help with the wedding was charity work. She's basically hotel staff, Madison had said with a laugh. But family is family, and I believe in giving people opportunities to feel useful. That recording played in my office while I stared out at the Seattle skyline, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Each word was a scalpel, cutting away any remaining emotional attachment I had to the sister who'd raised me in name only. By the time the recording ended, I felt nothing but cold, professional focus. That's when I reached out to our family's estate attorney, Harold Wimsley. Harold had managed our parents' affairs and knew every detail of their will and Madison's trust fund conditions. More importantly, he'd watched our family dynamics deteriorate after the funeral. "Serafina," he said warmly when I called. "I've been following your success from afar. Your parents would be so proud of what you've built." "Thank you, Harold. I need to discuss Madison's trust fund, specifically the moral character clauses." His pause spoke volumes. "Has something happened?" I explained the situation carefully, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Madison's pattern of exploitation, her treatment of service workers, and most importantly, her fraudulent claims about our business relationship that could constitute trust fund fraud. "The original documents are very clear," Harold said slowly. "Your parents were concerned about Madison's sense of entitlement even at 20. They included provisions that would trigger a review if she demonstrated pattern behavior that contradicted family values, particularly regarding how she treated others less fortunate." "What would such a review entail?" "Temporary suspension of fund access pending investigation." Given that she's claiming fraudulent business relationships and exploiting family connections for personal gain, well, that would certainly qualify. The final piece of my strategy involved Kyle's family. Through my investigator, I learned that Kyle's gambling debts were far worse than I'd initially discovered. He owed over $80,000 to some very unpleasant people, and his father's company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Kyle was essentially marrying Madison for her trust fund money, a fact that Madison herself was oblivious to. But Kyle's sister Emma was different. She worked as a social worker, lived modestly, and from what I could observe, genuinely cared about family relationships. She was also deeply uncomfortable with Kyle's financial situation and had tried unsuccessfully to stage an intervention about his gambling. I arranged to accidentally encounter Emma at a coffee shop near her office. The conversation that followed was illuminating. "I'm worried about Kyle," she admitted after I'd introduced myself as Madison's sister. "He's been so secretive lately, and this wedding, it's so expensive. I don't understand how they're affording it." "Madison has family money," I said carefully. "But Kyle seems stressed about something." Emma's expression darkened. "He owes money. A lot of money. To people who don't negotiate payment plans. I think he's counting on Madison's inheritance to solve his problems, but she doesn't know how bad it is." That conversation confirmed what I'd suspected. Kyle was using Madison just as much as she'd used me. The difference was that Madison deserved what was coming. I spent the final 2 weeks before the wedding putting the last pieces in place. I arranged for Harold to attend the wedding as a guest. Madison had invited him years ago during one of her attempts to seem sophisticated about family business. I coordinated with my staff to document every interaction, every demand, every moment of Madison's entitled behavior. Most importantly, I prepared the reveal itself. Madison thought she was getting married at an exclusive venue through her sister's connections. She was about to learn that her sister didn't just work in hotels, her sister owned the hotel, along with 4 others, and had spent 15 years building an empire while Madison squandered inherited wealth on shopping and vacations. The guest list included several people who'd known our family before our parents died. Business associates, family friends, distant relatives, all of whom would recognize the significance of seeing a Blackwood wedding at the Meridian Rose. in the ballroom where our parents had celebrated their own anniversary parties. Madison had no idea she'd invited witnesses to her own reckoning. As the wedding day approached, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not the nervous energy of uncertainty, but the calm confidence that comes from having planned every detail of a complex operation. Madison had spent 15 years treating me like I was beneath her consideration. It was time to show her exactly who she'd been underestimating. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned with the kind of perfect Seattle weather that makes tourists believe the rain stories are myths: clear skies, 72 degrees, and a gentle breeze off Elliott Bay. I arrived at the Meridian Rose at 6 a.m., 3 hours before Madison was scheduled for her preparation suite, and found my staff already implementing our carefully choreographed plan. My executive team knew exactly who I was, but we'd agreed to maintain professional distance until the right moment. David briefed me on Madison's increasingly demanding behavior over the past week. She'd called 4 times to change the flower arrangements, screamed at our florist for using the wrong shade of blush pink, and demanded that we replace our award-winning champagne with a cheaper brand because she thought our guests wouldn't know the difference anyway. She also insisted on inspecting the staff uniforms yesterday, Maria added with barely concealed irritation. Said she wanted to make sure we looked professional enough for her event. Then she asked if we could tone down the ethnic decorations in the lobby because they might confuse her husband's European relatives. The ethnic decorations she was referring to were a stunning collection of Pacific Northwest indigenous art that I'd commissioned specifically to honor the region's cultural heritage. They were worth more than most people's houses and represented relationships I'd built with local tribal artists over years of respectful collaboration. But Madison's cultural insensitivity was just the beginning. Through our security system, I watched her arrive with her bridal party at 9 a.m., already treating my property like she owned it. She walked through the lobby criticizing our marble floors, too shiny, our chandeliers, trying too hard, and our staff's demeanor could be more enthusiastic. What she didn't know was that several of our guests had arrived early and were witnessing her behavior firsthand. Harold Wimsley sat in our lobby cafe, documenting everything with the trained eye of an attorney who'd spent decades evaluating character. Dr. Elizabeth Chin, our family's former physician who'd known Madison since childhood, watched from the mezzanine as Madison berated our concierge for not having her favorite coffee brand immediately available. But the most significant early arrival was Victoria Sterling, the society columnist for Seattle Metropolitan Magazine. I'd suggested to her publicist that the Meridian Rose's wedding coverage might be interesting, given some unusual family dynamics at play. Victoria had a reputation for recognizing when there was more to a story than appeared on the surface. Madison's preparation suite was our penthouse level, with panoramic views of the Sound and enough space for 12 people to get ready comfortably. I deliberately assigned our newest staff member, Jessica, to coordinate Madison's needs. Jessica was eager, competent, and had no idea about the family connection. Her genuine attempts to please would make Madison's inevitable cruelty even more stark. The first real explosion came at 11 a.m. when Madison discovered that Kyle was also getting ready in the hotel instead of arriving separately. Through our communication system, I heard her shriek at David about protocol violations and ruining her vision. What she didn't know was that Kyle was in our second-floor suite dealing with a very different crisis. Emma had chosen that morning to stage her intervention about Kyle's gambling debts, bringing documentation of his financial situation that she'd finally managed to compile. The conversation, which I could hear through our discreet security system, was brutal. $87,000, Kyle. Emma's voice was sharp with disbelief. To multiple casinos? And you haven't told Madison any of this. It's handled, Kyle snapped, but his voice carried the strain of someone whose lies were crumbling. After today, everything changes. Madison's trust fund will cover it, and I'll never gamble again. You're using her. She's using me too, Kyle said with stunning honesty. She wants arm candy from a good family to show off to her society friends. I need financial stability. It's a transaction, Emma. Don't pretend it's some grand romance. That conversation was being recorded, of course. Not for malicious purposes, but because the Meridian Rose's insurance required security documentation of all events. What our guests chose to discuss in our rooms was their business, but if legal issues arose later, we needed protection. Meanwhile, Madison's behavior was escalating in direct proportion to her stress levels. She screamed at our makeup artist for using cheap brushes. They were custom-made Italian imports worth $500 each. She demanded that we move her ceremony time up an hour because she didn't want to wait around all day, seemingly oblivious to the fact that 150 guests had already received invitations with the original schedule. But the moment that crystallized everything happened at noon, when Madison encountered Mrs. Patterson, our head of housekeeping, in the hallway. Mrs. Patterson had worked at the Meridian Rose since before I'd purchased it. She was 68 years old, had 5 grandchildren, and approached her work with a dignity that commanded respect from everyone who met her. She'd known our family peripherally through her previous job at our parents' country club and had watched me grow from a grief-stricken teenager into a successful businesswoman. Madison was rushing back to her suite when she nearly collided with Mrs. Patterson's housekeeping cart. "Watch where you're going," Madison snapped. "This is my wedding day. Staff need to be invisible, not blocking hallways." Mrs. Patterson, who had been quietly arranging fresh linens for the guest rooms, looked up with surprised dignity. "I apologize, miss. I was just finishing the rooms for your guests' comfort." "Well, finish faster," Madison said coldly. "And make sure those rooms are perfect. Some very important people are staying here tonight, and they'll notice if you people can't do your jobs properly." "You people." Again. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but I caught it through the security monitor. It was the look of someone recognizing exactly who they were dealing with and finding them wanting. "Of course, miss," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Everything will be perfect for your special day." Madison swept away without another word, but Mrs. Patterson stood still for a long moment, her weathered hands gripping the cart handle. Then she looked directly up at the security camera, almost as if she knew I was watching, and shook her head sadly. That's when I knew it was time to begin positioning my key allies. I found Harold in the lobby, nursing his second coffee and reading what appeared to be legal documents, but was actually Madison's trust fund paperwork. "How are we feeling about today's events?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. His smile was grim. "Your sister has had 12 interactions with staff members since arriving. Every single one has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that your parents specifically identified as grounds for trust fund review. And Kyle? Oh, that young man is about to have a very difficult conversation with his bride. Emma shared some interesting financial documents with me 20 minutes ago." Dr. Chin approached our table with the measured pace of someone who'd spent decades delivering difficult news to families. "Serafina, dear," she said warmly, embracing me with genuine affection. "I've been watching Madison this morning. I'm afraid I see very little of the child your parents raised." "People change," I said diplomatically. "Indeed they do," Dr. Chin replied. "Sometimes they reveal who they truly were all along." Victoria Sterling materialized beside our table as if summoned by the conversation itself. "Serafina Blackwood," she said with a journalist's sharp smile. "I had no idea you'd be here today. How wonderful to see the Blackwood family celebrating at the Meridian Rose again. Your parents hosted such lovely events here." The emphasis on "again" was deliberate. Victoria knew exactly who owned this hotel, and she was clearly anticipating a story worth her time. As 1 o'clock approached ceremony time, I positioned myself to watch Madison's final transformation from spoiled heiress to public spectacle. She had no idea that her next few hours would destroy not just her wedding, but her entire understanding of her place in the world. The guests were arriving, the staff was ready, and justice was about to be served with champagne and cake. Are you getting chills yet? Because what happens next literally made my hands shake when I lived through it. Drop a comment if you can guess what Madison's about to discover, and stick around because the next part is where everything explodes. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in our Cascade Ballroom, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sound and crystal chandeliers that had hosted senators and celebrities. Madison had chosen the space specifically because it looked important enough for her social media posts. She had no idea she was standing in a room where our parents had celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, surrounded by the same people who remembered when the Blackwood name meant something. At 1:45, I positioned myself in the back of the ballroom, wearing a simple navy dress that wouldn't draw attention. Madison's guests filled the seats. A mix of her college sorority sisters, Kyle's gambling buddies disguised as groomsmen, and the family friends she'd invited to witness her triumph. What she didn't realize was that half the guest list remembered me as the grieving 16-year-old who disappeared from society after the funeral. Madison made her entrance at exactly 2 o'clock, wearing a $20,000 Vera Wang gown that she'd charged to her trust fund. She looked stunning, I had to admit. Radiant in the way that only someone completely confident in their superiority could manage. The assembled guests rose to their feet as she processed down the aisle, her expression triumphant. Kyle waited at the altar looking distinctly uncomfortable, sweat visible on his forehead despite the perfect climate control. Emma sat in the front row with tears in her eyes, but not the happy kind. The officiant, Reverend Morrison, had known our family for decades. He'd performed our parents' funeral service and had been quietly horrified when I'd briefed him on Madison's recent behavior. His expression was carefully neutral as he began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Madison Blackwood and Kyle Sterling in this beautiful venue. Excuse me, Reverend Morrison, I said, standing up in the back of the room. My voice carried clearly in the acoustically perfect space. I need to address something before we continue. The entire ballroom turned to look at me. Madison's face shifted from confusion to irritation in seconds. Sarah? What are you doing? This is my wedding. I walked slowly down the aisle, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Every step was measured, deliberate. When I reached the front of the room, I turned to face the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. For those who don't know me, I'm Serafina Blackwood, Madison's sister. I wanted to take a moment to welcome you all to the Meridian Rose. Madison's face was turning red. Sarah, sit down. This is completely inappropriate. I also want to welcome you, I continued, my voice growing stronger, to my hotel. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the exact moment when several guests, Harold, Dr. Chin, Mrs. Patterson's children who worked our catering staff, realized what was happening. Your hotel. Madison's voice cracked. What are you talking about? You work for these people, you got me a discount. No, Madison. I own the Meridian Rose. I own this ballroom, those chandeliers, the penthouse suite you've been getting ready in, and the staff you've been treating like servants for the past 3 months. I paused, letting that sink in. I am the Blackwood Collection. The murmur that rippled through the guests was like watching dominoes fall. Victoria Sterling was furiously taking notes. Harold was nodding grimly. Dr. Chin had her hand over her mouth. Madison stared at me with complete incomprehension. That's impossible. You were nobody after Mom and Dad died. You had nothing. I had nothing because you took everything, I said calmly. But what I built afterward, I built without family money. Every brick of this hotel, every relationship with our staff, every success, I earned it myself while you spent our parents' inheritance on shopping trips and sorority parties. Kyle was backing away from the altar, his face pale. Emma was watching him with an expression of grim satisfaction. This is ridiculous, Madison said, her voice shrill. You're lying. You're just staff. You told me you worked in hotels. I do work in hotels. I work in my hotels. Every person you've screamed at for the past 3 months? They work for me. Mrs. Patterson, who you called you people this morning. She's been with me for 5 years and makes more in annual bonuses than you spend on shoes. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward from where she'd been standing with the catering staff, no longer in her uniform, but wearing an elegant black dress. "Miss Madison," she said with quiet dignity, "I've worked for your sister since she bought this hotel. She's never spoken to any of us the way you have today." Madison spun around wildly, as if looking for someone to contradict this nightmare. "Kyle. Kyle, tell them this is crazy." But Kyle was gone. While everyone had been focused on our conversation, he'd slipped out through the side door. Emma stood up from her front row seat. "Kyle left about 3 minutes ago," she announced to the room. "Probably headed to the airport. He owes $87,000 to casinos across 3 states, and he was counting on Madison's trust fund to pay his debts." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible now. Madison whirled back to face me, her perfectly applied makeup starting to run with angry tears. "You planned this," she whispered. "You planned all of this." "I planned to give you exactly what you asked for," I said. "A beautiful wedding at an exclusive venue. You got it. You just didn't realize you were asking your estranged sister, the one you abandoned at 16, to comp you a $60,000 event at her own hotel." Harold stepped forward, briefcase in hand. "Madison, we need to discuss your trust fund. Your behavior over the past several months has triggered the moral character review that your parents built into the inheritance structure." Madison's face went white. "What?" "Fraudulent business claims, exploitation of family relationships, and a documented pattern of treating service workers with disrespect," Harold said formally. "All grounds for temporary suspension of fund access pending investigation." Victoria Sterling was now openly recording on her phone. This was no longer just a wedding disruption. This was Seattle society news. Madison looked around the ballroom one more time, seeing her guests' faces properly for the first time. The pity, the embarrassment, the uncomfortable recognition that they'd all witnessed something that would be talked about for years. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice breaking. "This is my wedding day." "This was your wedding day," I corrected gently. "Now it's just Tuesday afternoon at my hotel, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The next hour unfolded like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Madison stood frozen at the altar for a full 30 seconds after my revelation, her brain apparently unable to process the complete reversal of everything she thought she knew about our relationship. The wedding guests didn't know whether to leave, stay, or start taking pictures. Most settled for uncomfortable murmuring while Victoria Sterling conducted impromptu interviews with anyone willing to speak on record. Dr. Chin was explaining to a small group how she'd watched both Blackwood sisters grow up, noting the profound differences in their characters even as children. "Madison, honey," her maid of honor, Brittany, finally said, "maybe we should go back upstairs and figure this out." That seemed to break Madison's paralysis. She turned to Brittany with wild eyes. "Figure this out? My sister just humiliated me at my own wedding. My fiancé ran away. My trust fund is frozen." Her voice was climbing toward hysteria. "There's nothing to figure out. My life is ruined." "Your life isn't ruined," I said calmly. "It's just not going to be as easy as you thought it would be." Madison whirled back to face me, and for a moment I saw pure hatred flash across her face. "You vindictive bitch. You planned this whole thing because you're jealous." "Madison." Harold's voice cut through her building rant like a blade. "I strongly advise you to stop talking and come with me to discuss your legal situation." But Madison was beyond listening to advice. 15 years of unchecked privilege had not prepared her for this moment, and she was crumbling spectacularly. "Jealous of what?" she shrieked. "You have nothing. You've always had nothing. Mom and Dad left me everything because they knew you were worthless." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward again, her voice gentle but firm. "Miss Madison, your parents would be heartbroken to hear you speaking this way. They loved both their daughters." "Don't you dare tell me about my parents," Madison snapped, spinning to face Mrs. Patterson. "You're just staff. You don't know anything about our family. Actually, Dr. Chen interjected, moving to stand beside Mrs. Patterson. Your parents were my patients for over 20 years. I was there the night you were born, and the night Serafina was born. They absolutely would not approve of how you've behaved today. Madison's carefully constructed social facade was disintegrating in real time. The guests who'd come to celebrate her triumph were instead witnessing the complete breakdown of someone who'd never learned to handle adversity. This is all lies, she said, but her voice was losing its conviction. Sarah couldn't own hotels. She was a nobody after the accident. Madison, I said quietly, I need you to leave my property now. That's when she completely lost control. Your property, she screamed. This is supposed to be my day. I booked this venue. I invited these people. You can't throw me out of my own wedding. David appeared at my elbow with two of our security staff, discreet, professional, but unmistakably present. Miss Blackwood, he said politely, shall I escort your guests to the reception space while you handle family matters? The guests took the hint. Led by Victoria Sterling, who wasn't missing a moment of this drama, they began filing out of the ballroom. Some looked embarrassed, others fascinated, but none seemed surprised by the turn of events. Madison's behavior over the past few hours had prepared them for something dramatic. Harold remained, along with Dr. Chin and Mrs. Patterson. Emma had also stayed, looking like she was watching karma in real time. Madison, Harold said once the ballroom had mostly cleared, your trust fund suspension is effective immediately. The investigation will take approximately 30 days. During that time, you'll need to arrange alternative living and financial arrangements. Madison's face went ashen. Alternative arrangements? What do you mean? Your penthouse apartment? Trust fund property. Your car? Trust fund lease. Your credit cards? Trust fund accounts. Harold's voice was professional but not unkind. Everything you've been living on for the past 7 years belongs to the trust, not to you personally. I watched my sister process the reality that she had never actually owned anything in her adult life. Every comfort, every luxury, every symbol of status had been borrowed against an inheritance she'd assumed was unconditional. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. Emma stepped forward. You can stay with me for a few days while you figure things out, she said quietly. Kyle's gambling destroyed his finances, but his family isn't cruel. The kindness in Emma's offer seemed to break something in Madison. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, still wearing her wedding dress, and began to cry. Not the pretty tears of movie heartbreak, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Why? She asked me through her tears. Why would you do this to me? I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. Underneath the designer gown and professional makeup, I could see the scared 20-year-old who'd inherited more money than she knew how to handle and had never learned to view other people as fully human. I didn't do this to you, Madison, I said gently. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. Dr. Chin moved to sit beside Madison, her medical training kicking in. Honey, this isn't the end of the world. It's a chance to figure out who you really are when you're not defining yourself by what you own. Madison looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know how to be anything else. That admission hung in the air like a confession. For the first time since our parents died, I felt something other than anger toward my sister. Not forgiveness. That would take time and genuine change, but something like pity. Then maybe it's time to learn, I said. Harold was gathering his papers. Madison, I'll need you to return the trust fund credit cards and keys to the penthouse by tomorrow morning. After that, we'll schedule a meeting to discuss the investigation process. Madison nodded mutely, looking lost in the enormous ballroom that suddenly felt more like a courtroom than a celebration space. As we prepared to leave, Victoria Sterling reappeared with her photographer. Serafina, could I get a comment for the story? This is going to be front page tomorrow. I looked at Madison, still sitting in her wedding dress among the empty chairs, and made a decision that surprised even me. Actually, Victoria, I think we'll keep this as a private family matter for now. 3 months later, I sat in my office overlooking Elliott Bay, reading Victoria Sterling's follow-up article about the Blackwood wedding incident, as Seattle Society had dubbed it. She'd honored my request to keep the initial story private, but the aftermath had been impossible to contain entirely. Kyle had indeed fled to Europe, leaving behind a trail of debts and a very relieved Emma, who'd started a support group for families affected by gambling addiction. His disappearance had actually made Madison's situation easier by eliminating any question about her judgment in partners. Madison's trust fund investigation had concluded after 6 weeks. Harold's final report documented her pattern of treating service workers poorly, her fraudulent claims about family business relationships, and her general failure to embody the family values our parents had prioritized. The trust's board, composed of family friends and business associates, had voted to maintain the suspension indefinitely, with one option for reinstatement. She could earn back access to half the original amount by completing 2 years of community service, financial literacy courses, and regular therapy sessions. The other half would remain locked until she demonstrated sustained evidence of character growth, as evaluated by an independent panel. It was a harsh consequence, but not a cruel one. Our parents had structured the trust with exactly this scenario in mind. They'd worried even when Madison was young that inherited wealth might corrupt her development into a responsible adult. The knock on my office door interrupted my reading. "Come in," I called, expecting David with the quarterly reports. Instead, Madison walked in. I hadn't seen her since the wedding day. Emma had told me that Madison was staying in a studio apartment in Capitol Hill, working at a nonprofit that helped homeless families find housing. She looked different, thinner, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of designer clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail rather than the elaborate styles she'd favored. "Hi," she said uncertainly. "I know I don't have an appointment. David said you might have a few minutes." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Of course. How are you doing?" Madison sat down carefully, her posture less confident than I remembered. "I'm learning things. About myself. About how I treated people." She paused, looking out at the water. "I came to apologize." I waited, letting her find her words. "I was horrible to you after Mom and Dad died. I was scared and angry, and I had all this money, and it felt easier to just push you away rather than figure out how to share grief with someone." Her voice was steadier than I'd expected. "Then when I saw you building something amazing on your own, I think I felt threatened. Like your success made my choices look worse." "What choices were those?" Madison laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Choosing to coast. Choosing to treat people like they existed to serve me. Choosing to believe that having money meant I was better than everyone else." She met my eyes directly. "I spent 15 years becoming someone our parents wouldn't recognize. And now? Now I'm trying to become someone I can respect." Madison pulled out a folded paper from her purse. "I brought you something. It's a letter I wrote in therapy. My counselor suggested I share it with you, but only if I genuinely meant it." I took the letter but didn't unfold it. "What does it say?" "It says that I'm proud of what you built. It says that I'm sorry for trying to diminish your success because I was embarrassed by my own failures. And it says," she took a shaky breath, "it says that I understand if you never want a relationship with me, but that I hope someday we might be able to try." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen since we were children: genuine vulnerability. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the uncertainty of someone learning to navigate the world without inherited advantages. "Madison," I said carefully, "forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a process that requires consistent change over time." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me try to earn it." I thought about our parents, about the values they'd tried to instill in both of us. They'd believed in second chances, but they'd also believed that consequences were how people learned to make better choices. "Tell me about your work at the nonprofit." Madison's face brightened slightly. "It's a transitional housing program. I help families who've been homeless find permanent apartments and connect them with job training, childcare, medical services. She paused. A lot of the people I work with have been treated the way I used to treat service workers. Seeing that from the outside, it's been humbling. What have you learned? That dignity isn't something you earn based on your job or income. That kindness costs nothing but changes everything. That the people I dismissed as just staff often had more wisdom and character than I ever developed. Madison's voice grew stronger. Mrs. Patterson sends me Christmas cards, did you know that? Even after how I treated her at the wedding. She writes about her grandchildren and asks how I'm doing in my new job. That surprised me. Mrs. Patterson hadn't mentioned staying in contact with Madison. She didn't tell you because she knew you might feel conflicted about it, Madison continued, reading my expression. But she said something to me that day that changed how I think about family. She said that blood relatives can hurt you, but chosen family is the people who love you because of who you choose to be. I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. Madison, I built something good here. These people, my staff, my colleagues, my business partners, they're my family now. If you want any chance of being part of my life again, you need to understand that disrespecting them means disrespecting me. I understand, she said immediately. And I want you to know, what you built is incredible. The Meridian Rose isn't just a successful business. When I was planning the wedding, I asked dozens of vendors about working here. Every single person talked about how fairly you treat your employees, how much you invest in the community, how you've changed the hospitality industry's approach to worker rights. That meant more to me than she could know. There's something else, Madison said. Harold told me that you could have had me permanently cut off from the trust fund. You had enough documentation to make that case. But you chose the reinstatement option instead. I had chosen that, though I hadn't told anyone why. Our parents believed people could change, I said simply. I wanted to leave room for the possibility that they were right. Madison's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. They were right about you anyway. You became everything they hoped we both would be. We sat quietly for a moment, looking out at the sound where ferries carried people toward new destinations. So, what happens now? Madison asked. Now you keep doing the work, I said. Keep learning, keep growing, keep treating people with dignity. In a year, if you're still on this path, maybe we can have coffee and see where we stand. Madison nodded, standing to leave. Thank you for seeing me. And Sarah? Congratulations on everything you've built. You deserve every bit of success you've achieved. After she left, I unfolded the letter she'd given me. It was longer than I'd expected, filled with specific acknowledgments of her behavior and detailed plans for how she intended to change. At the bottom, in her familiar handwriting, she'd written, I'm proud to be Serafina Blackwood's sister, even if I haven't earned the right to call myself that yet. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about justice and karma and the long arc of family relationships. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's giving someone the chance to become worthy of redemption while building something beautiful for yourself in the process. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door, bringing afternoon tea as she had every day for 5 years. How did it go? She asked gently, setting down the tray. Better than expected, I said. She's learning. Mrs. Patterson smiled. People can surprise you, dear. Sometimes the ones who fall the hardest find the strongest foundation when they finally decide to build something real. I thought about Madison working with homeless families, learning to see dignity in everyone she met. About Emma starting her support group. About Kyle facing consequences for his choices somewhere in Europe. About the letter in my hands that represented possibility rather than certainty. Yes, I agreed. Sometimes they do.